Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Ukrainian Spaces today. This time around, Valeria is our listener. She is not feeling well, so feel better, please. Um, our hearts and thoughts with you today. But Titana is going to be my co-host for this one.
Hello!
Hello. Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава всім.
Yeah, thank you so much also for joining and helping us out with this one. So how have you been?
I don't... Well, let's see. I think I speak for many Ukrainians when I say that I've been getting headaches. I have not slept very well. I feel like I'm carrying a small animal inside the center of my chest all the time. It just feels a little bit heavy and distracting. What about you, Valeria?
I think she's a listener.
Oh, she's listening. Okay, sorry. What about you, Maksym? The same?
I think it's been obviously a very traumatic several days for Ukraine, definitely with what is happening still, and especially what is happening for many days to my home city of Zaporizhia, where the bombings are very volatile and happening almost every night. So on the other hand, what I'm always trying to remind people that what has happened yesterday maybe is a really larger scale, but if you look at the smaller cities and villages all around Ukraine, this is exactly what has been happening every day since February 24th. Apartment buildings, hospitals, kindergartens, schools, parks being erased, targeted, people being killed. So that's why I'm a bit upset with people using such rhetoric, especially in mainstream media, calling it escalation or, Russia was triggered or Russia was provoked or, all of this kind of language that falsely describes the situation as something exceptionally unusual that happened just because someone triggered Russia. They've been doing it every day.
Yeah,
this genocide wasn't like nonstop.
It's a fair point, I think, and I think people were saying that, oh, it's just like February 24th, when actually what's inaccurate about that statement, it's actually before the 24th. It's been, there's no escalation. There's a playbook now that has been happening for years or for generations. So I think, you'll see a lot of Ukrainians who are like, right, okay, keep your head up, go forward. Here's what we need to do to fix this. Keep donating, keep singing, keep kind of gathering in groups, which is quite empowering.
Absolutely. And also the story that I think everyone also should be sharing or could sharing, but this is a more important story of Ukrainian resilience. And today I posted a couple of tweets showing, which is like ridiculous even by Ukrainian standards, the speed of fixing up the bombed roads in Dnipro and also in Kyiv they looked completely destroyed just yesterday. Today they're already fixed and cars are driving by them like almost nothing happened, which is a lot of Ukrainians put jokes like, I wish the authorities would fix as fast my own backyard, for example, where some pods could be like there for months. But nevertheless, I think it's an important story to show that Ukraine is not a victim. Ukraine is a survivor.
Yeah.
And that's why people react to it very well as well.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I think we'll proceed right away to our featured guest today. I think I'll just do a quick introduction for Ukrainian Space, especially if you're joining us for the first time. So this is a live broadcast, but it's being automatically recorded, and then it will appear as a podcast in several weeks later. So if you're listening to the podcast or as a broadcast, welcome. So Ukrainian Spaces, we founded together in the first weeks when the genocide in Ukraine started, because we saw as Ukrainians millions of our fellow Ukrainians who would speak perfect English, sharing their stories across all social media platforms. Yet the conversations about Ukraine are still being dominated by Western pundits. What many of them seem to miss is the necessity to look at what's going on in Ukraine through the lens of Russian colonialism that has ravished the lands of Eastern Europe and Central Asia for centuries. Moreover, this ignoring Ukrainian voices continuously robs Ukrainians of their agency, perpetuates outdated, misleading, and false narratives about Ukraine and Ukrainians. So we want instead to foster a relaxed, safe, and chill space for Ukrainian voices to express themselves without the need of fitting Western boxes. And the rest can use the space to educate themselves and maybe decolonize your views of Ukraine and Ukrainians. But for the season 2 that we recently launched, we also want to do these crossover episodes where we feature guests from a country or from nations that either have lots of in common with Ukraine, or they're passionate Ukraine allies. But our common lens here is anti-colonialism. So that's these bridge episodes exist, and this one is devoted to our dear friend Peter. And Peter, if you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, greetings, Maksym. It's really a great pleasure and honor to be with you today. Thank you for the invitation. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you and sharing my experiences with you and all those who are tuning in today to listen to this conversation.
Thank you, Peter. I'm super excited as well. You're a dear friend of many years, and unfortunately, this is a very unfortunate background for us to finally have this public conversation that we always wanted to have. However, I'm super grateful you joined us, because this is a conversation that I know we've been having many times, and even when genocide in Ukraine started, you were one of the first people to reach out to me with your support. So I wanted to spend this time to, celebrating your work and featuring you, and maybe for other Ukraine supporters and Ukrainians to learn more about you as well, because I feel it's extremely important and will speak to many. But we have a very golden rule for Ukrainian Spaces. Our guests always introduce themselves the way they want them to introduce themselves. So please do, if you can explain everyone else who you are, where you come from, and maybe a little bit how your life might have been affected or changed in the recent months due to what is happening in Europe.
Well, thank you very much, Maksym. And again, it's a great honor to be here. I want to start off by saying to the people of Ukraine, especially those who are joining today, that I personally stand with you in solidarity. A lot of people across South Sudan and Africa, they understand what you are going through. There has been a bit of a difficulty in the ways in which the media has approached this, and the way in which other issues beyond the desire of the people of Ukraine to live in a free and secure future is being affected by everything else that happened. Personally, I feel very strongly about Ukraine. And the reason is because I have a direct connection. As you remember very well, Maksym, when we met in Kyiv. I first went to Kyiv as part of the Atlantic Council as a Millennium Fellow in 2015, just several months after the Maidan revolution. And I was really excited at that time. It was a great opportunity for me to learn about the struggle of the Ukrainian to free themselves of a government that was extremely corrupt and rapacious. One of the striking memories that I still remember was visiting the palace of Yanukovych, and just how bizarre that whole place was. The toilets with gold, heliport. Apparently, the whole thing was like $10 billion. And it reminded me of where I was coming from my country. At that time, I was back to school. I was doing a PhD in politics at the University of Cambridge. And I came to that study not because I wanted to be an academic. It was a practical concern for me. For many years, I worked in the government in South Sudan as advisor to our Minister of National Security and to our president. And it was at an exciting time when we just created our own country, because we fought for so many years. 21 years we fought. More than 2.5 million people died so that we can have a country. And I, as a young person, I grew up in the middle of this war. It shaped me. It left scars that I live with every single day and that I see every single day. So when we got our independence, we were extremely excited. We wanted to build that future for which we sacrificed so much. But we were unlucky because we had a leadership that did not have a vision, did not share the same vision that the people of South Sudan had wanted. And instead of embarking together with the people to build that democratic future, they instead adopted the same kind of instruments of suppression that the colonialists from the north had used to terrorize our people. So instead of having freedom, we end up having a society that is just replicating the same instruments of authority. And when I went to Ukraine, I saw hope, and I met with young people. I met with the leaders of Maidan. I met with journalists like you, Maksym, and I was deeply touched by the vision of your people. And since then, my admiration of Ukrainian people and Ukrainian society has only increased tremendously. I want you to understand that, and you all know now, it's not a new thing. And given your entire history, I visited so many churches that are so many years old. Your people have always stood there. They have been there. They're part of that place. This is your land. You are showing the world what it means to be free people. And I'm just moved by everything you are going through, the struggle you are going through. And I also want you to understand that, being a free people is not cheap. And exerting your identity and who you are is the foundation of everything. Without identity, you don't have a sense of who you are. And I think this is an issue that is sometimes not understood, and especially the way the media talk to our people in Africa. They don't get them to understand how the struggle the Ukrainians are going through is very much similar to the same struggle that we went through in Africa, and we still go through every single day in different parts of our continent. So I'm delighted to be here. Just the rest of the background. Currently, I'm a fellow at the Kennedy School at the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs. I work on the international security programs. So I'm delighted. I'm looking forward to talking with you and to answering any question and sharing with you also our experience, because I truly understand what your people are going through, and I feel for them. And I also want our people in Africa to understand this, not from a narrative of others, but the narrative of Ukrainians themselves, how they tell their story and what their struggle is about.
Peter, I remember that moment very well. So when we first met in Kiev, and it was after the Maidan Revolution, and of course it was a very diverse group of foreigners coming from the West, from Global South. And I remember that right away, I probably gave some talk or presentation about Ukraine, but I remember we instantly starting talking about our shared experiences, and I was actually very surprised and even a bit shocked that a person from far away, where I would usually not expect to have much in common, we kind of automatically connected over the same things that maybe back then I didn't even have the vocabulary and language to describe, you know. The things that you mentioned about your own country are replicating very toxic colonial baggage, how kleptocracy is often very intertwined closely with the legacy of colonialism, exploitation, and all these things. But I think now it becomes more and more apparent that these kind of experiences our countries share on some level. So I wanted to ask you, specifically about the conflicts and the wars like that they're shaping our identities and history. How do you see it's possible? I know it's a heavy question right away, but how do you see it's possible to kind of for people to be minded of that legacy so we break the cycle and we try to break free of these patterns of reinforced colonialism, even by our own people?
I guess for us, we are not the best example of how you free yourself of these legacies, because our struggle was very long and very complicated, and because anything long is naturally makes people tired, and war, when it goes on for so long, at some point people just want to live and to move on from it. 21 years of it was not easy on our people. And there was a lot of bloodshed. There was a lot of divisions and betrayal. So one of the things that happened for many years, just to give you a bit of background of our history, we in Sudan, with the present-day Sudan, was a very big country. It was the largest country in Africa, very diverse. Sudan is bordered to the north by Egypt, and then to the south by Kenya, Democratic Republic of Congo, Uganda, Central African Republic, and then to Ethiopia, Eritrea. So we live in a very complex geography. Now, many years before the scramble for Africa and the Europeans came to Africa, the Turks had already come through the expansion of the Ottoman Empire, and they had taken over Egypt. And over the period of the Ottoman Empire, the Egyptian, they used to call it the Khedive of Egypt. Actually, it was started by Albanian Muslim called Muhammad Ali, became the king of Egypt. He wanted to build in Egypt a very strong kingdom that could potentially break away from the rest of the Ottoman Empire. And he started expanding to the south, to the present-day Sudan, conquering some of the small kingdoms that had remained there when the ancient state of Kush has collapsed. So what happened since then is all these small city-states in the north were usurped by the Egyptian. And then they tried to penetrate what to the present-day southern Sudan. But that penetration did not go too far. So because of that, the Khedive of Egypt began claiming sovereignty over these territories that he has taken over in the Sudan, the present-day North Sudan. Now, the communities, ethnic group that have lived there were a mixture, sort of like a new race that was created, because from the 7th century, when Islam began expanding out of the Middle East, one of the places that it first expanded to was Africa, especially Northern Africa. And then it was expanding to the south, because that part of the world had been a Christendom for many years, especially in the early centuries. So when the Arabs expanded, there was a new race that was created through trade and intermarriage in the Sudan. So people, they speak Arabic language, they identify with a big part of Arab culture, but if you look at them ethnically, they're black people. Now, because of the Egyptian influence, these people were easily integrated into the northern Egypt. Now, with the scramble for Africa, the present-day southern Sudan, in the conference of Berlin, when the European powers, basically European powers, they met, they sat, and they said, here is this continent in Africa lying around. And they just decided to take territories Congo take this, France take this, Britain take this. They just dividing it, and they just cut it to different spaces. So the present-day Sudan was supposed to be part of the France, but because Britain by then was a growing power and had become influential in Egypt, and Britain companies had helped to build the Suez Canal. Suez Canal reduced the time of travel from Britain to India by half. So Egypt now was very, very important to Britain because of Suez Canal. And because Egypt is a desert, 96% of Egypt is desert, the only economy of Egypt, the only thing that sustained it is the Nile. So now anything on the Nile was automatically claimed by Britain, although some of those territories had been awarded to France. So Sudan was created out of this as a very complex entity, both colonized by Britain and Egypt, using the pretext of the Egyptian sovereignty to claim the whole Sudan. So you see, our colonialism was actually much worse. So we had the British colonialism, we had the Egyptian. Now, these one they left in 1956. And what happened by then, they had not built any schools in the South. They had not educated our people. The education has only been in the North. So at the day that after the World War II, there was now a move for decolonization and all these countries to be independent. They basically just attached the two people of the South and of the North with different ethnicities, different religion, different background. And with no one in the South even aware of what is happening. The most highly educated person from the South at the time was someone who was a high school graduate. We didn't even have anybody that had finished college. So the North just took over the South, and they just began with the same colonialism, colonizing us. Now it became even worse. They want to impose Islam on us. They want to impose Arab culture because they say they want to unify the country. And for them to unify the country meant vanquishing our African identity, which we in the South could not accept because we are African and we identify as African. They identify as Arabs, and they used not to think for a very long time, the Northerners had a huge problem where they did not consider themselves black, but when you actually see them, they're black people, which what was found was very bizarre. You know?
I'm sorry. I'll just quickly add up, because when you first told me the story, the thing that also struck in parallel is how the territory of Ukraine and Eastern Europe was divided up during the Yalta Conference by these Western powers without any input, without any knowledge, without any say from my own people. And we ended up all across the region with territories that would not represent or would not encompass our historical legacy, ancestral lands, and everything else. And nobody asked us at all. And we just ended up with something that those leaders, in Moscow and from West decided for us. And that was a clear parallel.
Right, absolutely. And what I actually like about the way that Ukraine is now resisting is that, yes, there's a lot of people supporting you from the outside world, and that is wonderful. I'm glad of the support that the Americans are providing, the support that the European Union and everyone is providing. But let no one tell you that the reason why Ukraine is winning is because of these other support. That is not because of it. The key issue here that I see every day, and when I see these footages, is the resilience of the Ukrainian people. And they have decided that they're going to stand up for their own identity. Then it's not going to be decided by them, by NATO or by anyone. And to be honest, it's been very bizarre watching some of the discussion on Twitter with some of these billionaires like Elon Musk coming up with like suggestion of certain deal that can be cut, and the proposal and all of these things. And I say, what do the Ukrainian people say? Because ultimately, it is about them. It's not about anyone else. Even if Ukraine were to fight with a bow and arrows. And by the way, my great-grandfather, when the Britain invaded our area, he was the chief of our clan. He fought an insurgency against Britain for more than a decade with only bows and arrows. So it's not about the instruments of fight that give the fight legitimacy or allow the people to win. Yes, they matter in battle. But what really matter are the blind forces of nature. What is it that you are fighting for? And how it connects to your soul and the sense of who you are. So, there has always been these big powers that feel like they can just decide to do whatever. And because they are so big and they have all these big guns and nuclear weapon and intelligences and assassination hit squad, that they can just demolish anything, they can do anything and get away with it because they are big power. And to a certain extent, the international community has allowed that to be the norm. That if you're big, then of course, what can we do about it? That some deal has to be cut. And at the end of the day, it's not just about any deal that can be cut, because there are certain things where a deal is impossible, and it should be so, because how do you trade something like freedom? How do you trade identity? There is no value on it that can be placed on it. And those who have never really had to fight to exert their presence so that people understand who they are and what they are fighting for, they don't understand it. They feel like anything is a trade. But there are certain things that are not trade. Even if the entire people should die, they will be wiped out. And the Native American, by the way, they understand it in this country. Because some of the ethnicities in Native American, they were entirely wiped out, and they accepted their fate rather than live with a bended knee. You rather not exist, and I think there is something important in that, in understanding. And in the way the world is so confused and the way all the international systems and institutions are letting us down is because everything has become so trade, to the sense that the character of human being has become so hollow. If you see now the human being that we find in the West, they're highly educated, they're complex, they're whatever, they're inventing technologies or whatever, but they're so fragile. The depth of character is so wanting, because we believe we are in this new world where values and things like that don't really matter. They only matter because we speak about them, but not matter because we truly feel them and we are willing to defend them should it become necessary.
It's so powerful when you mention this line that those who have never had to fight it, they don't understand it. And, even before that, of course, Ukrainians, this is not the first time the Ukrainians are going through genocide, but this is the first time when I'm witnessing it. And lots of things become much more clearer, and especially that line that not everything is negotiable, especially when it comes to not only your life, but who you are and your identity. And you, Peter, as your country went through genocide and through horrible things. And I wonder, it also sometimes triggers you to hear, when people talk about South Sudan, and it's one of the newest countries in the world, and there's so much suggestions and propaganda suggesting that people of South Sudan just benefited from someone allowing them to set up a state, right? So it was like a deal that would made by greater powers, or by the support of the United States and other nonsense that's usually used in anti-South Sudanese propaganda. So I bet it's also triggering for you to hear the same talk happening about other countries these days, including Ukraine, right?
No, absolutely. And I think it's one of the things that you people need to be very aware of this from the very beginning. Because, look, it's great when I have to be very honest with you. We benefited from the support of other countries. And believe me, if we did not have those support, our struggle would have took much longer, and even more people would have died. So we are grateful for those support. When our war initially broke out, this was during the Cold War, when the world was aligned between the US and the Soviet Union. And Sudan actually at the time had a close military relationship with the United States. So when the war broke out, US responded by giving more military assistance to Sudan. And we in the South, we had no choice at that time. We needed to fight for our freedom, and we need to exert who we are, so that we are Sudanese, just like the Northern Sudanese. And the only place where we could get support was the Ethiopian government, the Derg regime of Mengistu Haile Mariam, which was a communist regime, had a very strong support from the Soviet Union. So, to get them to support us, we have to pretend we are communists and to sing their language and all of that. We got the support in the end. Obviously, the Soviet Union collapsed. But later on, people now understood what we are fighting for. And the United States changed its stand. Instead of supporting the Sudan regime, which by then was really taken over by terrorists, uh, and literally speaking, they had like bin Laden living in Khartoum as their guests. And they were going around the world trying to assassinate people. They tried to kill the former president of Egypt at the African Union conference in Addis Ababa. They bombed a U.S. embassy in Dar es Salaam, in Tanzania, and in Nairobi. So U.S. by itself realized that this is a terrorist regime. It's not us who are terrorists. It's the one that they have been supporting were terrorists. And they shifted their support and they began to support us. The diplomatic support of the United States has been enormous. We are grateful for it, definitely. But at the end of the day, it was our own people that shed the blood, that sweat, that shed those tears. 2.5 million of them. Now, we are a very small people. People may think when 2.5 million people die, this must be a huge population. No. The last time we did census in 2010, the entire population of South Sudan was 8 million. Mm. So imagine a society where 2.5 million people would rather die than be subverted to a sense of identity that they do not belong, that they do not feel, right? So I always feel in the end, the credit belongs to them. These are the people that liberated the country. These are the people we are grateful for. These are the people that our current regime have disappointed. Accountability is not to anyone from outside world. It's to our own people. And I have no doubt the way that I have seen the resilience of your people, Ukraine is going to win. Ukraine will win. But when Ukraine wins, let Ukraine stand on its own feet, right? Let Ukraine not be used by others that have other interests. And that is a point that you, Ukrainian people, you should be very clear on. Because at the end of the day, this war will end. And you are standing up for a right thing. You have absolute right to defend your country. Russian people are your brothers. Just like you are neighbors to one another. Ukraine is not fighting because it doesn't want Russia to exist. They want to exist side by side with a Russia that respect Ukraine, that understand that the Ukrainian people are a people, free people. God has given them the self-determination and the right to decide their own future, and they are not answerable to anyone else on this earth. They're only answerable to themselves, right? That is the future that you want. This war will come to an end. You will still live with Russia. It will be there. I hope Russia will still there. Ukraine will be there. All of you will be there. And at some point, Russian people will understand that the regime has created for them a disaster that was unnecessary. So that bonds, sometimes war comes, and sometimes during the war, people think that it is the end of the world. I want to remind you, it's not at the end of the world. Even we now with North Sudan, now we live side by side because they respect us. And if we had not gone to war and really show them that there was a line that cannot be crossed, that respect would have not even emerged. So I have no doubt that the Russian people will respect Ukrainian people. They will say, "Oh, okay."
You're very. I mean, you're very optimistic because I think like what we're feeling at the moment, and of course, this is the height of genocide. So of course, it's very it's very painful even for people to imagine being in the same space with anyone from Russia, with any Russian, because it hurts you physically. You feel threatened physically just because of genocide that is happening. But yeah, I feel like lots of Ukrainians seeing this situation through, again, the history. And of course, nobody wants to do anything with Russia or invade Russia, or just like everybody would just want them to leave us alone forever. But also we look at the history and we realize that this is something that keeps happening to us, and this is something that Russia through generations keeps doing to Ukrainian people. And I think ultimately, you're right in a way. This is something Russians should reflect first. And if they will never reflect on their colonial legacy and what they did, not only to Ukrainians, to hundreds of other nations, this will never end. And this is, I think, something that unfortunately out of our control up until the point that we need to defeat Russia. And this is where the probably self-reflection could start. But Peter, I wanted to also ask you, because you're one of my role models because of what you endured for your country and for your people. And you've been also imprisoned for 18 months just relatively recently in South Sudan for your democracy and your peace activism. And I was really scared that I won't ever, hear from you or see you ever again during those months. But luckily, you're free now. But what I always wanted kind of to ask you, and I think this is so relevant for many of us these days, especially people who fight on the front line, those months of you just enduring imprisonment for beliefs, for what you believe in freedom and democracy for your country, what would you say to people how it was possible for you not to break, not to become demoralized, not to succumb to constant terror? I think this could be very relevant for any Ukrainians these days.
For me, when I was detained, I had been, first, just to give a bit of background, I was advisor to our Minister of National Security and our president immediately after our independence. And I came to this role from the World Bank. And it was a really great opportunity because we were a new nation and we were establishing our intelligence agencies and the national security architecture for the first time. And for me, as a young person, given such an enormous role, I was super excited and I poured my heart into it. But it became very clear that our president had a different vision. He never really intended to follow the Constitution because this Constitution was clear what was the mandate of the intelligence agencies. Like anywhere else in the world, they collect information, they analyze it, and then they provide advice to the relevant authorities. The mandate is very narrow. Some of the operations that they do are covert, and it's very clear. But our president wanted to build a security institution he could control because he realized he had not governed the country well. He was extremely corrupt, and people wanted to get rid of him. They wanted to have elections. And he wanted to find ways to avoid election by personalizing the security sector. So when I realized that my efforts were no longer bearing any fruits, and I could see the tides of war rising in the country, I left the government. I resigned. And it was one of the reasons why I actually went for a PhD, because I want to understand what was so wrong with our politics. Why was our president behaving that way? And I realized part of the reason. And through my study, I then went on to activism, trying to correct some of the false narrative that the regime was putting out, and organizing young people to demand democratic vote. And through this journey, the response of the regime was just intimidation. It's sort of like, if you remember the Yanukovych regime, when people wanted to come out on the street, that was exactly what was happening. People being shot on the street. I'm trying to move across the country. I'm being intimidated. I'm being ambushed. And I cannot accept to be intimidated, especially a country that we all liberated together, like the way you Ukrainians are fighting now. All of you are dying in the front line, and tomorrow some guy want to be a dictator, and you want to go and bring in Russians and want to go and bring in Chinese to come and loot the country. You will not accept. Each one of you will be willing to stand up for it, and that is the position that I took. So I went mobilizing young people, mobilizing the veterans, so that we have democratic election within our party. Our party was the one that liberated the country. The president did not want that because he's afraid of running in the election. So he resorted to intimidation, put me in jail. And the intention while I was in jail was to create conditions so that I, quote unquote, die of natural causes. There's nothing natural about it. It's basically you're being fed, food that is not fit for human consumption. You are sleeping on cement without a bed sheet or a blanket for the entire time. You're in a cell. I guess my cell was like 1 by 1.5, and I'm like nearly 2 meters tall. Right? So I could not even stretch my body in this cell. Has no window. Juba is super hot, by the way. Juba, sometimes the temperatures get to 40 degrees Celsius. You are inside a cell with there is no window. You literally take everything off. You just stay on your underwear, right? And then light is turned off. A lot of torturing happening inside the prison. What I realized is that the only way I'm going to survive, first of all, is to focus on what was the fundamental issue in the front of me, and that is to survive. The regime wanted me, first, to die in prison. Second, if somehow I don't die in prison, was to damage me so that I'm completely deformed. And when I come out, I'm no longer capable of everything that I was doing before this incident. So I had to first understand what is it that they're trying to do. And I made a promise that I'm not going to die in this prison. And I'm going to come out still the same person. But it was a struggle. Each day it required focus. It required really understanding who you are. And there is nothing like solitary confinement that really understand what you are all about. You come back to your fundamental sense of who you are. And I think that, for me, that was really what kept me going. And being aware of what is it that I was fighting for. Right? I was not fighting for something on my own or something I was doing out of my ego. I was doing it because fundamentally I believe it at the core of my blood. And I was okay with sacrificing, putting everything on the line for this. You know, it was okay with me if I did not live. It did not matter. What mattered was that I was going to fight and make sure I live. If somebody want to shoot me, welcome. But somehow, because you bring me food with like bugs in it, and because it has bugs in it, you think I will not eat it, so that when I get sick, I can just die in prison? No, I'm going to eat it with the bugs. That is the kind of mindset that I shift in. You have to survive, and you have to survive so that you can tell the story of your survival and others who may not make it, so that people really understand the depth of what is happening. And I guess it's the same thing for people of Ukraine today. You are being bombed. You don't know any moment a bomb can land on you. People are being deprived of food. People are living in horrible condition. There is that threat that you may not live to see tomorrow. And not only, even if you live, it may damage you psychologically and mentally. And people are losing limbs and they are deformed forever. But at the end of the day, that is the whole point of it. You want to stand up for yourself, for who you are. You want to fight for your vision of the world. That is what counts in the end. There is nothing that you can say is valuable if you are truly not willing to lay your life for it. What gives it value is what the price that you are willing to get it for. And there is nothing more valuable for us as human beings than our own life, because we live only once and we don't know how that life may turn out. We are very young people. We are in our 30s. Mm-hmm. But with what we have gone through, people will think like we are old people, because apparently when you are old, you are supposed to be okay with dying. But my experience, actually, these old guys, when they live to be old, they don't want to die anymore. When they hear of death, they run away. Because by then, they are no longer really in the ascent. They're no longer really fighting for ideals. But at this age, it's all about that. Otherwise, there is no point of life. So you are going through it, but you will prevail. You will still come out. In fact, you will come out greater. You will come out a greater people. You will come out a greater country.
It's remarkable, Peter, because what you're saying and reading these days about the testimonies of people who spend months and weeks and are still spending, tens of thousands of people spending in torture chambers and unoccupied territories, and the stuff that they had to and are going through, and the reasoning that they use why they decided to survive is absolutely exactly worded the same way that you said about, like, of course, surviving because that's your own life, but also surviving to tell a story, and surviving because the whole point of genocide is to either eradicate you physically or break you So you do not
Absolutely.
possess your identity anymore.
Absolutely.
And if you succumb, this is where genocide wins. And this is
Absolutely.
remarkable, yeah,
Absolutely.
to hear the same words for you that probably so resonate. Peter, I wanted to quickly ask a couple of more questions. Well, the first, I think, most important elephant in the room is that despite that there's so much solidarity for Ukraine elsewhere in the world, especially in the West, it's very hard still for us, despite that we're trying hard. It's very hard for us to connect with this global South and, with places in Africa as well. So in your own experience, when you talk to fellow South Sudanese people, what do you feel like? Where's the rift? Where's the misunderstanding that prevents people from forming that, kind of strong empathy first with people of Ukraine? How do you explain it for yourself?
For me, you see, I have been blessed with so many opportunities and in life. Like I mentioned, I grew up in civil war, forced to have to fight for my life at a very young age. Then spent 9 years, on and off in a refugee camp in Kenya, and then later on in the United States. Then having access to some of the elitist universities in the world and opportunities to travel. And what I enjoy most about traveling around the world is to understand other people and to understand their reality. Because there is so much that people put there that divide us. But at the end of the day, there's a lot that really unite us if you come with respect and true understanding, true curiosity to know the world. Because we live in the same space. We breathe the same air. We are one people. When I came to Ukraine, it was the first time that I visited Eastern Europe. And it was the first country in Eastern Europe that I went to. I had met Ukrainian before. Some of them I studied with during my graduate school. And we spoke about our shared experiences. So I had a chance to talk and listen, and then also meeting you. You say that you look up to me, but I also look up to you because listening to your struggles in Ukraine, not just only for the identity of Ukrainian, but also your own personal identity and the personal struggles that you had to endure. It was something that I easily connect, and it helped me also to break down my own misconception and things like that. So I had that opportunity to see also the reality that Ukraine had gone through, the type of regime that Russia had propped up that was completely destroying the country, looting the country for the benefit of the few. But because it was in the interest of Moscow, they were willing to just prop it up. It's sort of like what is going on in my country now. The same regime in the north that we fought for 21 years is now propping up a regime in the south that is completely against our interests. So I totally understand. And I understand the meaning of freedom is so that you can decide. If Ukrainians want to join in NATO, it's their decision. They want to join European Union, it's their decision. If somehow they decide they want to join the African Union, yeah, it's their decision. No one will come and ask them, you are in Europe, why are you joining? It's their decision. There are free people. They can decide what they want. But I feel part of the problem is the way in which the media has told the story. It has not really understood itself in many parts of Africa and global South. And because people are looking, yes, is a big power that is acting shamelessly to destroy a little power. And the people say is, from the perspective, at least, the main criticism actually is directed at the United States. They say United States has behaved exactly the same way before. In Africa, one of the leaders that was very popular was Muammar Gaddafi, the president of Libya. It was a natural resource-rich country. In fact, Libya used to bankroll the African Union. But Libya is today a failed state, is in shambles. And it's because France misled all the other Western powers to destroy Libya without any real issue. And people in Africa struggle to understand why. The same thing if you come to Iraq and the invasion of Iraq. Saddam Hussein was a terrible man. But at the end of the day, the legitimacy of Iraq war is still questioned in many parts of the world. So they say, yes, Russia is a big power and is acting in a belligerent way. But this is exactly what the United States has been doing. And then in the context of neocolonialism that you were telling us, France is a big headache for many of African people. France, as you know very well, still controls the hard currencies of 14 African countries. They print money in Paris and shift it to them. They have a right to any natural resource that is discovered. They are the first to have the right whether they will accept or refuse it, and you cannot sell it to anybody. Things that really show in the end these countries are not free. And
but it's hilarious because I bet, especially now, there's not a single Ukrainian who would be happy with France either. And I think that's something that lots of folks in the Global South also, I would love them to know that, yes, Ukraine is aspiring to rejoin European family. We've been kept from Europe by force for many decades of colonization. But on the same time, we have so much issues with the West and being treated as a second class by the West for many decades. And we're wanting to join those institutions to reform them first and foremost. And I think this is something that is often lost, as you rightly pointed out in the coverage. And this is a big issue. Peter, I'm sorry I'm interrupting you, but we'll have to wrap up soon. But I wanted to bring Tatiana. We have some of the comments and questions from our listeners and our patrons. And once again, thank you so much for our patrons, because Ukrainian Spaces is 100% listener supported and exists thanks to your support. And if you love this episode, please also join or consider joining our Patreon fam. Tatiana, yeah, go ahead. I know we have quite a few comments at the moment.
Yeah. It's like, hello, Peter. So I just wanted to say thank you, first of all, because you've really engaged so many listeners with your story and your passion and your humanity. So I wanted to thank you for that, because, you know, sometimes people are a bit nervous to leave comments and ask questions, but everybody is just really piling in, and I love it. So there's some of the comments here. So on Twitter, the username Shimtim says, "This is the most powerful talk I have heard in a long time. Thank you all for sharing and hosting." So thank you for that. There's Dr. Anna Pirate on Twitter says, "Thank you for educating us on other suffering so we may have perspective." Yes. Which is a lovely thing to say, because that's exactly what these bridge episodes are trying to do, you know, to create these parallels so that this is wider beyond Ukraine. The next Twitter user is Sane Malik. I'm 30 years of age. My father is from Senegal and my mother is German. The generation I've been socialized in never had to face those kinds of struggles and fear. This space is truly inspiring, and I'm deeply thankful that I've got the opportunity to listen to your words. And it goes back to what you were saying, Peter, earlier about, you know, people who never had to fight do not understand, which is really kind of it's meaningful for people to understand that. And then from our patrons, on our Patreon page, we have some comments, because we have a little chat group that we have, and people get a front row seat when they are patrons. And we have one from Alexandra, who says, "I think that what happens in Ukraine now is first and foremost an existential fight. What Russia does is genocide, but Ukrainians are fighters and not victims." And I think that it's not just Ukrainians, because Peter, as you said in your story, you identify as, with all of this positivity that you have in you. I don't know how you managed to be so positive and so hopeful. You are a fighter and not a victim. And I think that's how you learn about yourself. And then one more patron named Margaret says, thank you for today's meaningful and inspiring Ukrainian spaces. Like always, it moves me deeply. Peter's experiences as well, and as the resilience and strength of Ukrainians, remind me of Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning book. So anyway, I just wanted to share that with all of you. And Peter, again, it was an absolute honor.
By the way, if I can just add, that book, Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, I read it in prison when I was in a detention by the national security, one of the worst experiences of my life. And it was smuggled into my cell by one of my captives. And I'm grateful because there was a period where they will turn off the light for 2 weeks and I will be in complete darkness and for 2 weeks and not even know what is going on. And then later on, they will turn on the light and then the light will go on for days and days and days and weeks. And I will read that book. And it gave me a deeper understanding of Holocaust and what the Jewish people had to endure. And it is in that moment of suffering, when you are stripped of all of this, that you really come down to the fundamentals. So it's interesting that she mentioned this book, and it's a very important book. I was really inspired by it, and I was strengthened by it. I found strength in it, and it guided me in my own reflection of myself and the struggles that I was fighting.
Wow, that's beautiful.
I have goosebumps, Peter, but that's very powerful indeed. Thank you so much. I mean, I feel like, and usually we have these talks and they can go on and go on because there's so much that is inspiring about what you're saying. And honestly, these are the darkest days I've ever had in my life. And hearing you talking about your experiences, which I cannot even probably comprehend because there's nothing in my own life that would measure to that. However, it gives me so much new hope and energy and determination to inspire to just power through this, because there are much more important things at stake, and not succumbing to that kind of terrorism is a paramount. Absolutely.
Well, my brother, that terrorism can never be allowed to win. The Ukrainian people are standing, staring at it face down, and it will never win because there is no way it could possibly win. And I have no doubt whatsoever. And the victory of Ukraine will not be for Ukraine itself. It will be the remaking of the world, a better world where things like what the people of Ukraine are enduring today can never, ever be repeated again.
Thank you. Hopefully our next conversation, public conversation, is going to be when we will be spending all the time to thinking about how to reform and remake the world, not to preserve ourselves and not to stay alive.
Amen.
Fingers
Amen.
crossed. Yeah.
Amen.
Amen to that.
Amen.
Thank you so much, Peter. It was an honor to feature you. It was an honor to share your story with our audience, and hopefully you'll be back with us as well. Thank you.
I'll look forward to it. Thank you so much.
And for the rest of you, especially if you're listening at this as a podcast, thank you so much for staying up to this point. But don't forget to rate and comment us. This is very important for independent podcasts to keep trending. And we're trending in numerous countries right now in top 10. So thank you so much. But it's only happening just because you keep sharing us and you keep rating and comment. But for the rest of you, thank you so much for staying with us for our another Bridge episode. And I have probably just one thing to add is Slava Ukraini.
Heroyam Slava, and Heroyam Slava from Val.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.